that.
Yeah, it's at best. If anybody hasn't played that, that is the thing that I would recommend doing this year that will change your life. Well, I did it, did my own financial statement, realized I was 30 days from bankruptcy. And I went, oh crap. So I went out and bought 8 houses, sold those 8 plus the other 3 on terms, and went from bleeding to death to making about $4,000 a month in passive income within a month.
How old were you at this time?
This is 2000, so 22.
Okay, so out of high school, just barely getting your feet wet. That's pretty good for being 22. I think when I was 22, I don't even want to know. Like, I don't even want to go there.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't investing in
Yeah.
houses.
So,
the nature of being forced into something because of it. I mean, necessity is the mother of all innovation. And I innovated my ass right off a chair and out into the world to go make some money because I was going to break financially. I was going to break. And I think that's a lot of times we don't have a moment of pain that forces us into action. And the truth is, action is where the adventure is. That's where all the cash is waiting to meet you.
yeah. So, 22 years old, you flipped 8 homes at this time. Was this in Alaska or was this down in
Phoenix? This is Alaska only has 8 homes.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I wouldn't think that Alaska would be a booming like real estate market. I'm sure it is now because everyone wants to go there, but
there's probably an HD TV show on flipping houses in the last
for
frontier.
sure.
Yeah. Right.
There is it's funny. The people that talk about flipping houses and doing business, it's all over the place. I think it's a mistake to think that wherever you are, there's no opportunity and you have to go somewhere else. I think there's an opportunity that's sitting right in front of you if you're aware enough to see it. I mean, that's one of the missing things I see from people where they bitch and moan about how life is hard. I'm like, just look around, drop me into your city. I'll go make it. I'll show you. But people miss it right in front of them.
Right. So, what took you to Phoenix from Alaska? You just change of scenery, wanted
the
to go
weather,
away from it?
obviously.
Yeah.
Well, when I was in Alaska, the last job I had before I left there, I was working in the oil fields, and I was literally dodging polar bears taking the trash out. Circle, polar bears hang out with the trash, and I had to I was doing the dishes and taking the trash out. So I was looking out for these things, and they will eat you. They're the most dangerous bear in the world.
Oh yeah.
They're fast and they're hungry. I mean, it's 80 below zero, literally. And here's this bear thinking, ooh, that's a moving object. That's probably tasty. And that was me. So 80 below zero to 70 above, I mean, you do the math. It was a pretty easy choice.
Yeah. Well, and you picked a good spot. I think Arizona, what was this, like 2000-ish or?
It was 97. So
97.
It was
Just
before
a little pre-bubble.
Yeah. I think the bubble down there was like 2008, 2007-ish.
Yeah, when I did my thing and I started buying these houses and I was doing the seminar model, I ended up buying 150 houses. About half of them were in Phoenix. And in 2004 and 5, I noticed my houses were going up like 10 or 15% a month.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that was irrational. And I sold off most of them. I mean, like almost all of them. And it's interesting to see some of the markets doing something similar right now. And I noticed that the people don't think that this is different or that this is the same as last time. They say everything is different. And I say, well, when things go up 10% a month, there's nothing rational about that in any market. So
do you think we're going to hit another a repeat?
I have no doubt. We're at the top of the market in a lot of these speculative spaces, which is dang near everything, whether you're talking about real estate or stocks or bonds. There's a bubble because of all the cash that's been pushed into these things. So my advice to everybody that's saying, well, what do we do? Do we get out? I say, make sure that whatever you're doing is sustainable through a correction, because corrections happen. It's part of a cycle. And, are you speculating or are you investing? And most people are speculating, which is incredibly dangerous. It's where you lose your Ferrari in the middle of the meltdown.
Yeah.
All right. So can you talk a little bit about I think you just sort of made an observation with, is saying that we're probably going to have a correction, at some point in the near, not too distant future. And I've heard this from other people too, to sort of reinforce that idea. But I think that is sort of a general awareness, like you're talking about with opportunity and stuff, spotting awareness. Is there anything you could give or any suggestions you could make for people to see that awareness? So, I mean, some people seem to be a little bit more tuned in, like you might be one of these guys that, can really see a market and you just kind of can feel what stuff is. But like for people who might be interested in getting into real estate or other things like that, where they're trying to invest in some, something real, something tangible, like a real estate asset, like, how do you keep yourself from just going and buying some nonsense place that your neighbor tells you about versus someplace that's actually good, you know?
Easiest thing that I didn't do after a while, I did in the beginning, and then I stopped doing it. And it's the first thing when somebody says, what's my next step? The next step is to make sure you've got gray or bald that you're listening to, that you're hanging out with. If you're listening to
I like that.
it's like that if you don't have a mentor that can sense it, that what's coming because they've been through it 2 or 3 times, you're going to get whacked because nobody's going to see it because you're going to be smoking your own fumes and you're not really going to get it. I see it. I can sense it. I'm not just looking at the Wall Street Journal headlines or what the talking heads on CNBC are saying. I literally can see exactly the same thing as 2006 and 7 happening right now.
Because you've been through it once already.
Because I've been through it. I've got emotional intelligence. I've got the scars. The scars give you this cerebral understanding where at your core, you can feel these things happening. And it's not just your gut, because I think people's guts get them all wound up. Everybody's gut right now is buying lottery tickets, the Powerball. And that's a bad idea. I mean, that's just literally
throwing money at the wall.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's not just me saying this. Like I was hanging out with Doug Duncan a few months ago. He's the chief economist for Fannie Mae, that 800-pound gorilla that runs all the financing for the market. And he said, we will be in a recession by the end of 2019. He is never wrong. I mean, this guy has all the data, and he's that right. So when a guy like that confirms what you're already thinking and what you're seeing, I tend to say, okay, this is probably the right track. And when the person that started real estate 3 years ago in their very first baby bull market is saying, oh no, this is different, I tend to not listen to them very closely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, and I might be screwing up the guy's name, but I think it's Peter Schiff. Is that his name? He's one of these economists too. I think he's sort of predicting something similar. And, so I think it makes sense to be aware of that forthcoming dip. Any advice on how to navigate it? I mean, so like, a person like you, maybe you're not as heavily invested in homes now, I'm not sure, but if you've got a little portfolio or you want to get into the market now, even knowing it's going to be bad, like, is it better to wait, or what do you think?
Well, there's always things that are going to be needed. Like in the 20s and 30s, when we ended up in the Great Depression, there were still things that needed to happen. I mean, and one of the things, if you're talking about real estate, people always have to live somewhere. And are they going to live in McMansions or are they going to live in apartments? So if you're flipping stuff, that tends to slow down drastically when you have a recession or you have a market cycle. Apartments that are in good places where people actually work, so that's a key indicator where they work. Like, where are the jobs that are going to be sustainable when you have corrections? And so I think you can be really smart unless you are out there speculating and trying to work your way into the greater fool theory of buying something that some other idiot's going to buy for more than you did. And that's not really creating value. So what value are you creating? The whole process here is figuring out how you're going to solve somebody's problem and creating value that you're going to exchange for cash. And a lot of people are missing that. They're just saying, oh, if I stand in front of cash, it'll hit me in the face. And this is their plan.
Yeah, sounds like a bad plan.
So I think we jumped ahead a little bit. Let's go back to the first crash, the one that you kind of went through. And this was like, I think 5 years before you wrote Reinvented Life. As I was reading through that, I think that's the time frame. You were kind of on you quote unquote mega-sized consumption addicted, fueled by the need to spend $1 million or more on your Amex Black Card every year. And then you called it your big boy card. And then you had a trigger point that changed your life. Can you talk about that? What happened and what changed? What's different now than then?
Well, so there's this law called Parkinson's law, and it's fascinating when you first start out in life and you're making your $20,000 or $30,000 and you spend it, and then you make $100,000 because you think that's where everything's going to be good, and then you realize you're spending $110,000, and it's strange because your expenses are always meeting your income. And that's the same thing that happened with me as I was making more and more hundreds of thousands and then millions. My American Express Black just kept me pushing that limit right up to the top, where I was spending $100,000 a month, sometimes $150,000 a month. And my overhead on my lifestyle was $75,000 a month. And I had one Ferrari that I actually owned. I was a member of a car club with a whole bunch of other ones. But the truth is, you can spend money on almost anything, and you can spend lots of it if you're not rational, if you're not actually paying attention to the numbers. So I just kept going and going, leveraging up and harvesting all this equity. So instead of being a smart long-term player, I was all about how much I could consume in the moment, which is what you see a lot of people doing now. They're consuming. They're not really playing the long game. And when I did that, ultimately, when the market slowed down and then took a step back, I was so leveraged that I had $20 million in properties. But when the market corrected and it dropped 20%, 30%, I didn't have enough room to actually be able to survive it. I didn't have enough I mean, I was too razor thin. Everything looked good on the surface, but I didn't have the ability to survive it. So ultimately, that meant that I went from a positive $5 million net worth to a negative $5 million. And it happened in 12 months. I mean, I was wrong on every project I was involved with simultaneously.
Wow. Talk about the perfect storm.
It was, yeah. I mean, I was a George Clooney movie. I mean, the hurricane was on my head, and that's, I see a lot of people heading there right now. I was in it, didn't know any better, because it was my first time of really going big, and the problem with going big and making a lot of money is that your ego takes over, and there's no humility, and there's no saying, okay, maybe it's time to be patient for a minute. Like, I made a few $1 million in cash, and I said, oh, it's time to lever up, instead of saying maybe it's a good time to take a vacation. But I wasn't willing to do that, and it cost me everything. It almost cost me my life, which is ultimately where the trigger moment came in, where I was in so much pain and so much desperation for trying to find meaning, because my self-worth and net worth were totally tied together, that when those 4 federal agents showed up at my door looking to serve, their notice, I did what you guys would do, right? I hid in the closet. And a couple hours later, I went outside and found out that they weren't even there for me. They were there for somebody else that lived in the house before me. But it was the universe giving me a sign that I was in a world of hurt and I needed to rewire, which is where Reinvented Life came from. When I wrote that, it was about that journey out of that darkness into a space where I can say, maybe there's a different path than the one I was on.
Had you written any books before that? Or was this your first kind of, I'm an author now?
I wrote a book in 2004. If you want to see the single worst cover in the history of book publishing, it's called Maverick Mistakes in Real Estate Investing. It's what it looks like if you use Comic Sans and you publish it. It's terrible. So if you want to give me a 1-star review and say this is the worst book cover ever, I would accept that.
That's funny. So from your trigger point, you kind of started working with like Dr. Allen and having him as a mentor. How did that help you kind of rebound from your low to getting to where you are today?
Well, yeah. And actually, not to take too big a step backwards, but I think there's maybe an in-between moment there too. So, the raid happened, you realized you needed to change. What was your next step? So, I mean, yeah, obviously you connected with a mentor, but how did you know to do that? Like, why was that the path you decided to go down?
Well, here's what I see a lot of people doing. And it's funny because you recognize things that you've done for yourself, or if you criticize somebody, really you're criticizing yourself. And so I see a lot of people doing what I did. I just sort of ignored it, pretended everything was fine. And you guys mentioned Peter Schiff. I went and worked on his United States Senate campaign in 2010. And I was so messed up when I went out there. I wasn't into the truth yet. I was still living in this kind of foggy lie. And I got fired from his campaign as a volunteer. Like that, but that was me. So I basically just ignored it. And Peter and I are friends now. We travel and teach together and stuff. But it was funny at the time. I was a mess. And a lot of times I see people and they say, I want something different. And I go, no, you're not ready. You're literally not ready to be responsible and own everything in your life. And it wasn't until 2011 when I found Frank and we sat down, and he sat there for almost 2 straight years, every week asking one question: what is true? He didn't say much for 2 years. He just sat there and held space.
And was expecting you to just kind of pull stuff out of your head and hope you're right.
Go deeper into the truth. I mean, it was really, because we all have this. We tend to look for answers with other people, and we say, what's the answer? And people reach out to me all the time and they say, I need help. And I say, with what? And they say, with my money. And I say, okay. And I just sit there and listen to them. And it's not because I'm a good therapist or anything. It's because I know how to find the question that they have the answer to. And they just didn't know what the question was. And that's what Frank was doing. He was helping me find the truth, which was buried about 700 layers down into my soul. And that's what we really need to find. But it takes time, and it takes a total commitment to go there. Most people aren't willing to do it because it hurts, because you see some really bad stuff on the way.
So what are finding the truth with him? What's the difference between him and the guy you were paying $3,000 a month for as a, you mentioned that in the book, but I mean, like, is that $3,000 advisor worth it? Or is it better to have someone like him just kind of work you through your own issues?
I was going to say that the $3,000, the difference between those two guys was integrity, but I would say that they both had integrity, because I would even say Adolf Hitler had integrity. And I say this because integrity is a consistency between what you say, what you believe, and what you do. And they both did. The problem with my $3,000 an hour advisor, I mean, this is a guy that I paid $10,000 a month to.
Oh, I was way off per hour.
I mean, it was out of control. I spent $400,000 with him over about 2.5 years.
Wow.
The problem there is that there was a lack of ethics and morals. He was very much in alignment with my black card consumption, spending, hedonism, that whole thing. He was great mentor. Totally showed me how to make it happen and spend like a wild man. And that was what he did well. He's great at creating a lot of that value. But in terms of creating actual value on the planet, terrible. And willing to look at anything being with the rule that the ends justify the means. Doesn't matter who you hurt, doesn't matter who you run over. And when I worked with Frank, we asked a different question. What is true? Had nothing to do with consumption or anything else. It was just, who are you? And how are you going to show up with that truth versus how are you going to go take as much as you can from anybody you can? And that was Dan's whole approach back in the 2000s.
Huh. Yeah, I like that approach better.
Well, it's certainly long-term more sustainable.
Yeah. Well, instead of just burning through everyone you know and taking what you can and then hoping it keeps coming, you're building everyone else up in the process, which is cool.
It's also incredibly dangerous. I mean, that when I was in my 20s, I ended up in the Mayo Clinic and checking in because I was a wreck. I mean, health-wise, I was falling apart. I got really heavy. I was really fat, and I was just a mess inside out, toxic. And I was probably on my way towards cancer and everything else. I mean, it was bad news. This is not supposed to happen in your 20s, but it was because there was so much toxicity in my life. This is where a lot of people, like on Wall Street, you see it a lot, where people in their 20s go hardcore, and it's about taking as much as they can, as fast as they can. It's very, very toxic. It's very dangerous. You got to have something more than just more as your reason.
Yeah. Well, it gives you something to work for too. So you worked with Frank, and then you met Chris and wrote The Reinvented Life. How did you meet Chris? Why did you partner up with him to write this book? I was reading his story about he was a classical musician, and he decided he was going to go take a job and then jump, just get out of the industry and just be a 9-to-5 guy. And then he got like 3 or 4 offers right at once. And then he's like, I'm going to take it. I'm going to do the record deal. I'm going to do this. And then he's in an airport, and this guy comes up and asks, so how much money are you actually making? And it just kind of light bulb moment for him. How did working with him to write this book help? I mean, like it's got to be an interesting process to co-write something like this. You mind going into that a little bit?
If you really want to understand whether you have a friendship with somebody, try to co-write something with them where you're in the same Google Doc writing over each other. You find out who your friends are and who you want to strangle. We had a totally aligned philosophy and approach to life, and that was about the truth. And the truth for us, we're both hardcore number guys. So when somebody says to me, my business is good and I'm making $2 million, I say, great, that's your ego number. That's top line. What are you actually bringing home? Well, I'm bringing this much. How much is in the bank account? Like, I go hardcore, deep, fast, and people don't like it until they love it. And Chris is the same way. People either love it or hate it. They love it when they're ready. They hate it when they want to hide from it. And because we have that philosophy around the truth and being willing to go hardcore fast, and we do not pull punches, and that's who we are, we vibed. And it's very rare. So to fight, it's like he's basically my brother. I mean, if there's anybody that you're meant to be brothers with, it's the guy that gets that level of intensity around the truth. So we hit it off as soon as we met. And because we're both teachers and we're both hardcore focused on candid truth, it really vibed and worked for us. And when I told him I was working on a project for this book, he said, I want to write it with you. And I said, I have no idea what that looks like, but it sounds awesome. And we did. We ended up creating this thing. And ultimately, that thing has led to people asking different questions, and it's opened people up to the truth. So it was totally worth it, even writing that thing over on top of each other. It was crazy.
Can you talk about the process of writing a book? I mean, most people haven't had that experience, and then publishing it and then getting it out. How long did it take? Were you committed like all day to it, or just kind of when you had time? Tell us about just being an author.
So I've helped a number of people with their books accidentally. And it was when you have a book and people, it's easy to say, I've got a book in me, I'm going to write a book. But then you end up becoming pregnant with a 900-ton blue whale, and you're like gestating this thing until you want to pop and you want to like, I'm going to destroy this whale. We decided to write this thing in August of 2012, and we said, all right, when are we going to release it? We decided 12/12/12. So we made a public announcement, and we said, okay, we backed into that date. What that meant when we picked that date, which was 4 months later, we had to have a rough draft in like 6 weeks. So we compressed time. That's one of the other laws. If you give yourself a certain amount of hours or days, you'll do it in that time. And people give themselves way too much time. They say, oh, I'm going to work on this thing for 2 years. For most people, that's totally ridiculous. It just allows you to push it off. So what we ended up doing is we had hardcore small deadlines around each of our chapters. Once we picked the process is really picking the big idea for the whole thing and then breaking it into 10, 12, 15, or 20 sub ideas. And then that's your focus. So each day we would say, okay, what's our focus? It was on this one thing, the one sub chapter. It was on simplicity. And we asked, okay, inside simplicity, what are the 3 things we're going to do? We're going to have a quote, we're going to have a story, we're going to have the lesson, and then there are going to be some questions to help the reader do something with it, not just read.
I like that, by the way. Good job doing that.
I think it's the only way that you can get that baby out of you. I mean, otherwise it just sits there and gestates forever. So that was our process. And because we had the accountability, the other missing piece for most people, they go, I've got a book, but nobody's there with them every single day. And so we actually pushed that thing through. It took us about 30 days and we had our rough cut. And then the next step was to hand it to somebody that actually knows how to read English and turn it back into real English. We had was a little bit ugly. Like it was an ugly baby. So we had somebody fix our ugly baby and it came back in a form that was more elegant and readable. And then, we got help. So we did the thing with the accountability with each other. And then we got other people that knew exactly how to take that thing and turn it into something that people actually would hold, read, and do something with.
Okay. So I've got a couple things I wanted to touch on. So first of all, I guess, and maybe this is in line with the book, but I want to go backwards a little bit. How do you avoid something like this? Is really common. I know with a lot of people who are professionals in their field or whatever. How do you avoid something like an imposter syndrome, where you can actually feel confident enough in what you're doing to come out and speak about it and teach about it and those sorts of things? Like, how do you know that what you've achieved is right or right enough that you can pass it along?
That's a really good question. What I see for the most part, I see people trying to accelerate being like having knowledge or wisdom. Actually, what they're doing is they're regurgitating. And I think when you look at a book, I was with Ryan Holiday, who wrote Ego is the Enemy and Obstacle is the Way. I was with him a couple of months ago. And he was talking about how he prefers people that have gone deep. And his books are amazing. He doesn't really share a lot of the stories, a little bit, but not like Chris and I did. I like to see stories where there's an actual experience. I think the differentiator between the amazing books that we really connect with and the authors is when the author is actually sharing something real and they're not just repackaging somebody else's stuff. So if you've had the life experience to bring something to the table and then teach from that, I don't think it's ever too early. I think you can have one experience and be able to teach from that. Or you can say, I've read a really good book. I'm going to splash some new colors on the cover and I'm going to teach from it. And I just don't think that's very authentic. I think you're just more of an academic at that point. And who needs more academics? We need people with actual real intelligence and wisdom from their experiences.
Right. Well, and then just as an extension of that, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? How do you know the people that you're listening to are of value and not just one of these people regurgitating people? Is it through network, through mentorship, through recommendation? Like, how would you identify the people that you would then go on to, seek mentorship from or whatever?
I always ask the question from people when they're pitching whatever it is they're pitching. I ask them, okay, show me your balance sheet. Show me your real life. Like, what is it that you've actually done? And when, especially in the financial world, when people say, I'm going to teach you about money or finance, I go, great, show me what you've done. Like, one of the great examples that I think is a great warning is when Tony Robbins, who I love, I got a ton of value, when he writes about money and he's teaching people about mutual funds inside this book. It's one of the single-handedly stupidest things I've ever read, where somebody that has made $400 or $500 million doing personal development is trying to teach you how to buy mutual funds and ETFs. There's a total misalignment there. And then if you look at somebody who's like Warren Buffett, that's somebody that you could learn from.
Yeah.
Because he's done it. So when you're listening and you're wondering, should I listen to this person? Should I go to their class? Should I pay attention? Are they living it? Is there an integrity around it? Have they actually gone through something? And have they been beat down by the universe and gotten back up? I think that question is missing because people want to have a perfect track record and then try to promote that as if they're Superman or something. That's not real. I think that that's a false start into the wrong path.
Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's really good advice. So I guess before we start getting into sort of the modern era of Damion, let's talk a little bit about, or continue talking about sort of your recovery. So now you're working with Dr. Allen, you've met Christopher, you are starting to make these changes in life. What does that trajectory back up from the bottom look like?
It's called work.
Yeah.
It's like a 4-letter word. Everybody's like, work. That sounds terrible.
You don't have some sort of get rich quick thing? No?
Get rich. See out there. Get rich dumb fast. I mean, so no, it was the work. I went hardcore back into the training, into martial arts after already having trained for over a decade. I said, okay, now it's time to really start training, and I'm deeper and deeper into that. And that was the training. I started really studying the financial instruments and the financial industry at a deeper level. Because you can make a bunch of money. That doesn't mean you know jack squat. Somebody says, I've been at Merrill Lynch for 27 years. And I say, that doesn't mean anything except you learn how to sell Merrill Lynch garbage. It doesn't say anything. So I said, it's time to do the work. It's time to go deep so that I can actually have an impact. And it's time to not focus on the consumption, but it's time to focus on what I'm actually bringing to the table for the rest of the planet. That was the big shift. And there was nothing sexy about it. I guarantee you, there's no sexy in the work, but it was fulfilling. And that's the difference between success and fulfillment. The work is what's fulfilling because it's not that moment in time where you're trying to hit it and then be done. It's really about the process, that journey. It goes back to mastery. We talk about this in the book, in the chapter, Success versus Fulfillment. We were just going down a path that was meaningful, and it wasn't just something that we wanted to show people. Like, it was something that we had to become.
Yeah. You mentioned you were big into yoga and Aikido. Did this kind of help in the rebound process? Was this something that you started then? And how did that affect and change your life? You actually have your own style of martial arts that you founded, Yokido. Is this based off of Aikido and kind of you take portions from that and do your own thing? Can you expound a little bit?
Yes, something that happens is fascinating. If you go deep enough into something else pops out. Like it evolves, and you and this thing mesh into something that's not the same. So after more than a decade of Aikido, I learned about yoga and started spending a lot of time in that. And I also started learning about Reiki and going deeper and deeper into that. Reiki is healing hands. It's a healing work that you do with your hands. So what I realized that there was something that was truly me, and that was this idea of taking Aikido, the idea of blending, and yoga, which is really all about the breath, and meshing those together and adding on Reiki. And so you end up in a situation where you're blending through conflict, you're redirecting the energy so that it's not hurting anybody. In addition to that, you're adding on the element of focused intention on healing, and that's where the Reiki is. So somebody comes at you in the street, or they come at you in business, and there's an attack. It's not just about punching somebody in the face. It's not just about redirecting them so you don't get hurt. It's literally about the intention and the process of finding ways to help heal them. And what you're doing is you're saying, it's important to me to make the world better every moment that I'm engaged with it. And that's what you're doing. You're healing the process while you're in the middle of it.
I like that. Well, let's take a jump forward now. Your company's called Black Belt Wealth. Can you talk a little bit about that and what I think on your LinkedIn profile, you have a goal to positively affect the lives of 1 million people and change their wealth status, or that might be the wrong term, but I'm pulling here. So
the mission is to free 1 million people from financial bondage.
There it is. Yeah.
It's because we've got this bondage, and it's not that we're stuck in jail and we don't have a choice. It's that we've put shackles on ourselves. And so the thinking and the mission here is based on empowering people, because we've really taken on the wrong idea, and we got this as kids, the idea that if we have a job, or if we have cash, or we have a 401k, whatever we have, that's going to end up being the freedom. And if we build up enough cash, or enough cash flow, or we have a business that works, then we're free. The truth is that has nothing to do with freedom. Freedom is about the confidence. Freedom is about you knowing and believing in yourself. So no matter what happens, the economy crashes, you lose your money, you get divorced, you lose your dog. I mean, like everything that happened to me in 2008, like when that all happens, the biggest problem there is I lost my confidence, and I didn't really understand how to get it back, because my confidence was based on balance sheet. So if we can understand that confidence is the process of building the muscle, then we can go into a place where we're truly free. And that's what Black Belt Wealth is. It's teaching the tools, and not just an academic pursuit, but really building the muscle. It's like you can't get fit by looking at the gym through the window. You have to go inside the thing and throw some weights around. Like, that is part of the process.
I wish I could just look at it and right.
Right? It's like you cannot read money from Tony Robbins and be financially free. Like, you got to go out there and stub your toes. You're going to bleed a little bit, and that is part of the process of being free. So my job and the focus of this organization is to help people, empower them with the tools and the ideas, and then inspire them enough to actually take action in something and go, oh, that didn't kill me. Like, there's no lion or bear that's going to eat you unless you grew up in Alaska like I did. Then you might get eaten. But if you're not in Africa or Alaska, those mistakes for you taking action are not going to eat you. Your amygdala is tricking you. It's playing games with you. All you're going to do is get stronger. And when you get stronger, you develop more confidence. When you have the confidence, that's where the freedom is.
I like that. On your website, you have a video that you talk about the runway or the financial freedom formula, and everyone should actually go check that out. Just DamionLupo.com. Watch the video. It's a great formula. Can you break that down real quick for our listeners?
Yeah, when you understand how to create assets, and there's a lot of really great teaching that Robert Kiyosaki does about this. You understand that assets that pay you start to create this alter ego that's not you trading your time for money. So ultimately, if you go out and you understand how to, you build the muscle around buying a rental house, and then you buy 10 rental houses, and each one of those houses pays you $300 a month, you've got $3,000 a month that's coming from assets. If your expenses right now are $3,000 a month, that you've literally covered your cash needs. If you've got $1,000 a month coming in from whatever it is, and you're spending $3,000 a month, you've got a deficit. And so that $2,000 a month means that you've got a certain number of months of runway. So if you've got $50,000 in the bank, you have 25 months of runway. It's how long you can go until you run out of gas and you go crashing down into the planet. The question is, how much runway do you have? When your residual income from these assets goes past your expenses, your runway is forever. You can literally start working for things that matter more than just your survival. When you shift away from survival, everything changes. You're working for purpose. You're not working to just eat and not die. That totally changes your perspective on life. And that's what the runway is about. What does it take for you to get past the point where you actually have to work to survive? Moving past that changes everything in your life.
So with the way that the forecast is looking, and when it looks like we're going to dip down into a recession, is your passive income from rentals still a viable thing? Is that something you want to invest in, or is that something that we should avoid for a little while?
The reality is people are never going to stop living somewhere, and we're not going to all be homeless. In fact, most people are always going to have something. And so if you're creating assets around supporting people living in an apartment or a house, not a McMansion, but a house, there's an opportunity, no matter what the economy is doing, to build an asset that's going to continue paying and working hard for you forever. So I don't think that really matters in terms of a recession having a destructive force on it. It's when you're speculating and you're hoping that you're going to create an asset based on you slapping some lipstick on a pig and saying this thing is worth $50,000 more. I'm going to flip it.
Flip it. Yeah.
Right. Are there other types of passive income you can talk about? Like, we've been talking a lot about real estate, and I guess that's where your expertise is. But what are some other things that people could get into? I mean, like, take me, for example. Like, I would love to get into real estate, but I don't know anybody in that field. I don't have any mentorship in that field. Not to say I couldn't seek it out, not making excuses or anything. But if I was looking for something else, like, what types of things could people invest in that might be passive income or could become it?
I'm assuming you could be an author like Damion Lupo and write books.
When you get your first check for $6.
Yeah, I was going to say, I worked in publishing for a while. I'm not going to push anyone into books.
So it's a terrible way to try to make money. And you put a lot of your heart and soul into it. But it is, there is that royalty. I think one of the smartest things that people can do, and I've been in a lot of these things, the network marketing world, where you can build a business by supporting other people. And if you find a company with great products, like I'm a member of Legal Shield, legal insurance, and I've been with that company for almost 20 years. That's a great way to create residual, because your efforts today keep paying off as you're serving more people and you're building an organization. So I love that model because it's there for anybody and it builds you as a human while you're building your wealth. So I'm a big fan. I just think that that's one of those things where you don't have to say, all right, I need an MBA or I've got exposure with real estate and it's scary. Like, most of these things you can get involved with for $100 or a few $100. I mean, that's not beyond anybody in the United States at all, probably most of the world.
Like that. You mentioned mint.com on your video with about the runway and the financial freedom formula. Can you talk about the differences between Mint and QuickBooks and why someone might want to use Mint over QuickBooks?
Because we're a bunch of liars. We will manipulate numbers. And when you've got Mint just gives it to you raw. Like it comes pouring in and basically Mint is going to give you feedback on, it's going to tell you exactly what you're doing. It's going to say, hey, here's what you're spending and month over month, quarter over quarter. Here's what's happening. So it's harder to manipulate your numbers if they're coming at you automatically. With QuickBooks, people will tend to ignore it. Like I remember for my first 2 years of real estate, I didn't even do accounting. I was too busy doing my thing. So I didn't even know how bad it was getting. Like I was building assets, but I was spending way too much money. And because I wasn't tracking it, there was no accountability and there was no optics. And this is where Mint gives you automatic optics. They give you intelligence. The best thing you can do is have somebody else that's looking at your numbers. And this is why if you don't have a bookkeeper, go get a bookkeeper. Like everybody needs a bookkeeper, even if it's just for you in your personal life. For $50 or $100 a month, you can have somebody just looking at your stuff and giving you feedback. Mint gives that to you. I think the next step up, if you truly want to get a hold of your life, is to be really clear on what the numbers say. And that's where having somebody saying, here's what it is, where you can't argue with the numbers. That's why I like numbers so much. You can't argue with them. They just are what they are.
Yeah. So say, for example, you've got your book set up with QuickBooks. Is Mint set up to work with your accountant as well? Or I've never used it, but if you're recommending it, I'm going to go check it out. But is that something I would give to my accountant and have him run my books through Mint? Or is that
Mint is really just a place where all of your accounts get fed in to this one place and then it consolidates them. You can add assets. You can really see your stuff moment to moment, day to day, very easily without a lot of effort. We're in an automation era where everything is being automated, and Mint just does that. QuickBooks is more dynamic with the way that you structure things. You're going to be able to get it to sing. It's just a lot more brain damage to get it going.
Yeah.
Where it's
set up a chart of accounts, all the fun stuff. Yeah. You've talked about on your sheet that you sent us beforehand. One of the questions was, what are the green and red arrows of wealth? And to be honest with you, I haven't looked that up yet, so I don't know anything about it. Can you define that for us?
Yeah, the green and red arrows came up because I was working with a client a few years ago, and they popped up. They were referred over to me, and they said, hey, so and so told us to call you, and we want to talk to you about money. And I said, okay, what do you want to talk about? And they said, well, we just made we're selling our house. We're going to have about $1.5 million, and we've got a bunch of money in the stock market right now. But every time we watch the news, where we see the market goes up, there's this green arrow, and we feel richer. But then we're nervous that we're going to see a red arrow tomorrow, and we're going to be poor, and we're on a damn roller coaster, and we don't like it. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, we want to get off the roller coaster. And I said, okay, so let's look at some alternatives. The alternatives were switching from being a victim or blaming the market or an advisor to really taking control of the money and having a life by design versus by default. I think the default is we hand our money over, we ride the roller coaster, we smoke a whole bunch of hopium.
That's funny.
This is a people's strategy. That's like the dumbest thing ever. So we shifted them. And 6 months later, we were on a trip, and I said, hey, did you guys see that the stock market dropped like 500 points today? And they said, no, we weren't paying attention. And I said, really? And they said, no, we don't even care, because they'd gotten off the roller coaster. They didn't care about the arrows anymore because their stuff was based on real estate. It was based on residual income. It was based on something that they could actually influence the value of and that they controlled. Huge shift when you go into control, and it's all about self-responsibility. That's where they started living, and it changed everything about their life.
Interesting.
Well, and I think maybe to that end, then let's talk a little bit more just about wealth. I think, like you were talking about your early days and the Ferraris and the running around spending money. Like I think that for a lot of, especially young people, I think that is the idea of what wealth is. Can you talk a little bit about how you define it and what you think wealth really is, or like maybe what the end goal ought to be once you get through your sneaker addiction or whatever it is that you're up to. That was mine, by the way.
He hasn't gotten over it, by the way.
I thought that was only of these. There was I forget who it was. It was a basketball player or somebody that had an entire room. It was like 4,000 square feet of sneakers. And I thought, is that even possible? But apparently it's all over the place. It's an endemic.
Oh yeah, it's insane. Yeah, it's a real problem.
Yeah, Google DJ AM sneaker collection. There's a lot of them.
So I have familiarity with stuff like the cars and some of that stuff. I think there's a potential for us to be able to be addicted to almost anything. What this is really doing though is this is satisfying our basic human need around significance and security. So two things are happening. One, we're nesting. We feel like the more stuff we have, the more secure we are. And it's just a basic human thing that's been in our brains for thousands of years. And the other one is significance, because we're not comfortable being just still. So we want to showcase and prove it to somebody else and get validation. That's significance. Those are the ego drivers. So the shoes and the stuff, the cars, that's all ego. When you want to move into more of a peak life, this is something that I developed not too long ago. It's the peak life is about the people in your life, the experiences, the environment, and the contribution, starting with the C, the contribution. When you shift into that, all of a sudden you're like, cars, shoes, I'm too busy focusing on my contribution to the planet. And here's where this really showed up for me. 4 years ago, when my dad got sick and ended up passing away, he looked at me a few weeks before he died and he said, there were so many things that I wanted to do. And I looked at him and I went, oh man, that sucks. That's regret. And it was because he was focused on significance and on his security. He nested and he was showcasing how valuable he was with the stuff that he had instead of going out and living and contributing. He had so much potential, but that's literally hell on earth when you die with the potential that was there the entire time that you never tapped into. You weren't focusing on contributing. You weren't focusing on the people. You were focusing on your nest and your significance. Hey, look at me. See my stuff. Nobody cares. They're too busy focused on their stuff. But the potential that you have to actually impact them in a positive way is what you'll die with, and that's hell on earth. So that's the big shift that we have to be able to take a little leap on and say, okay, you know what? Maybe it's not the nesting that's the most important thing. Maybe it actually is the contribution. Again, that's where life starts to change, and you stop thinking about how am I going to survive again today, because we're in America. This is not a Syrian refugee camp. Like, give me a break. It's not that hard.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. I think regret is something that holds people back from moving forward on stuff. I think it creates that fear, and it can become sort of a cycle that keeps people from actually achieving anything. And so I think your perspective on that is really interesting.
It's the worst thing that you can ever see. If you can imagine, the hell on earth is meeting the man that you could have been.
Right.
And I think in your last days and weeks, when you realize that you're sort of seeing, you're looking back and going, wow, there was so much left to do, to contribute, to experience. Most of us have an opportunity to rewrite that story before it's too late.
Well, even just jumping back, 10 years, looking at over the last 10 years, like what could I have done different to not only affect my life, but the lives of everyone around me over the last 10 years. And, I look back 10 years on my life and I'm very disappointed, and I kind of follow the same trajectory as you. I kind of had a crash a few years ago and I'm still rebounding. So I'm right where you were in 2010. I'm on the upward path and I hope I can stay that way.
So, but what would you say to people to maybe help motivate them through that regret? So, I mean, because a lot of people do get caught up in it, or they do, is it as simple as just, hey, whatever happened yesterday is gone, it's clean slate? Like, I mean, is there really, advice to move on past these things? Or is it all about, you're not spending your money on business coaches, but therapists instead?
Gosh, there's a bunch baked into that. The past is there to be able to teach us. And sometimes it's for an example, but a lot of times it's a warning saying, hey, dude, your future is going to look like your past if you don't shift something. So I think our past can be very valuable. What most of the population tends to do is cycle. So they have 20 years of the same 1 year of experience instead of having 20 new years and growing through that process, looking back the last 10 and saying, okay, I grew from these. Let me have it totally different the next 10. So it's a choice. This is the power J. Martin Coe wrote a book called Your Greatest Power. It's the power to choose. And we can choose what we do with our past, or we can sit there and dwell on it. It's like the person that was the football star in high school, or the person that went bankrupt 10 years, 20 years ago. You can choose whether you say it was great or it was bad. But the question is, what was the lesson? And then what are you going to do with that? Because you can't live in the past, except people try to, and they're stuck there. Either they want attention because it was bad and they want people to be with them in the misery, or it was so great and that was like they peaked when they were 18. So the question is, what are you going to do with it next? Are you going to hold on to it and stick with it, or are you going to actually learn from it and move beyond it?
Yeah, see, I went through a depressed period. Like 3 years of my life sucks, and I didn't do anything. I didn't progress. And just recently I've kind of like gotten out of it. I'm starting to get back to where I am, but that was super hard. You lose your ass and just, whatever, it's cool to have something to work for. And this podcast and just being able to meet people and network and hear people's stories like yours, it's really neat to kind of put them into perspective of what my life has actually been, and actually kind of take from that and actually apply it into my own life. And hearing your story and hearing how you've recovered, and granted, I wasn't like balling as big as you were, but I, it's cool to see that, like even someone who was as successful as you kind of get in the same position and work out of it again. It's really, really inspiring.
Mike only had a used Porsche.
No, I didn't even have that.
Not even,
but
no.
I mean, it's like,
it was like a Camry, really. I mean, I'm just making a joke.
Yeah.
You're like one of those. You're like an imposter.
Right.
Yeah, it was a kit car.
But so back on topic. Sorry to digress. What are some of the tools and the skills that someone who wants to invest need to have in their kind of arsenal to be able to do it successfully?
The tools that, okay, so you have got to have people around you. You don't have enough lifetime to learn everything on your own. You've got to have the right people around you. And it's not the bling and shiny and sizzle and sass type of people. I mean, they're interesting for about a minute. You need to have people that have been through stuff. I mean, those true mentors. Like when I started, I had Jim Rohn and I had Zig Ziglar and I had these people, Robert Kiyosaki, on tapes. That's all the people I spent time with, because everybody else thought I was crazy. So I just listened to them until I burned my tapes out. And for those of you that don't know what a tape is, this thing you stuck in your car and it has rhythm in it. So
pull it out with the pencil, rewind it.
Absolutely. So that's you got to have the right people that are influencing you. One of the things that you can do immediately is assess those people in your life. Like pick those top 5 people that you spend most of your time with and ask yourself, what is their level of worth? What is their self-worth, net worth? What is their level of health? How free are they? And then take all those 5 people, and when you look at those different categories, you're going to realize you're just the average of all those things. And if you want something different, you really have to have a better environment to support you, because you're going to naturally become that environment, including the people. That is a hard thing for people when they go, well, my family's around me. I can't just get rid of my family. Yes, you can. I mean, I did it. Doesn't mean you should. It just means you can. It means you're choosing not to. It means you're staying where you are on purpose, and it's a choice. So it's really you deciding that, hey, this is my life. It's my responsibility. That's the first thing, because you can go get all the tools, all the skills, all the mentors. You can listen to 10,000 podcasts, but if you're not willing to say it's only up to me, then you're just kidding yourself, and you're never going to make it anywhere. You're never going to get any traction, because you're going to be stuck being a victim. And that's where people stay, just being in victim land.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right. I mean, I think that's where people hang most of the time, actually. Just thinking about the folks around my life, this guy.
Shut up.
So I guess maybe this is just another kind of related topic. So in addition to developing the right schools and things to be a great investor, why isn't it enough to just hire somebody to do this? Like, why is it important that we should know, something about our own financial future?
Because the truth is, nobody's going to care about your money more than you do. And if you're willing to say, okay, well, I'm supposed to give my money over to people that are smarter than me, then you're going to, you're 20 years later, you're not going to be rich. You're going to be old. And it's because you're being fed on. You're literally the plankton of Wall Street's appetite. You're just going to be chewed up and spit out. And when I say Wall Street, I'm talking about the financial advisors, the people that are literally going to make money off of your sweat and blood. And if your strategy, again, it's more hopium. Well, that is not a strategy that's going to end well. It's going to be very, very sad when you wake up one day and you don't have time to go back and redo it. And you're going to say, I have no skills, no tools, and I have this piddly ass little pile of money, and I'm supposed to do something with that. Then you're going to vote in some crazy person at some point in the future to save you, instead of saying, okay, you know what, I want something different, I'm going to go do it. You cannot have a life of success financially if you're not willing to own the inputs and the outputs. You have to be able to say it's all mine. If you don't do that, you're always going to be on the edge. You're always going to be nervous. If I hand you $4 million at age 50 or 55 and say, hey, you're good, trust me, you're not going to be good. People come to me all the time and they go, I'm not good. I got $5 million and I'm terrified, because they don't have any skills around it, because they thought, oh, if I just get the money and then I hand it to somebody, I'm good. Well, look what happens when the Dow drops 400 points. Everybody panics except the people that have the muscle. They're like, oh, yeah, don't really care.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, it's like the guy that wins the lottery and blows it in 5 years, you know, same kind of thing, just not knowing what to do with it or how to invest it wisely. So
it goes back to significance, goes back to security. And the significance is I'm going to go get a yacht. So now we've got this crazy $1.6 billion Powerball. The person that does that in all likelihood will end up being bankrupt in 2 or 3 years, because they're going to get a yacht that's $2 billion. They're going to get dead. And it's just like, this is the psychology. It's not about the thing. It's about the psychology. And that's the thing that people miss. They go, oh, I got the cash, I'm good. You're so far from good, it's not even funny.
yeah.
So then what do you think, like if we were just kind of trying to break this down and start to wind up, what are the top 3 things that you've learned in starting all these companies and hitting rock bottom and building your way back up to the top? What are sort of, I don't know, some life wisdom or some, I don't want to know what we want to call them, some little nuggets that you could share with our audience that are maybe the key, findings or the key learnings that you've had over the course of your life?
One of the greatest things that I've ever learned was that working to learn is far better than working to earn. And so if you're going to work at a job or something, it's because you're learning something and you're building some type of muscle around that experience. We get addicted to money very easily. So it doesn't really matter how much you're making. There's an addiction to it. There's also this badge of honor around being busy. So you guys, I'm sure, have this happen. Maybe you say it. You ask somebody how you doing. They're like, oh, I'm busy as heck. I'm so busy. And you're like, oh, really? Wow, that's great. How is that great? That doesn't mean anything. But we tend to think that the busier we are, the better we are. Well, are you doing anything that actually matters? Or are you just spinning in circles? So I think it's important to step back. Like one of the things I do every morning, I sit there and I think. I have thinking time where I will sit down and I look at my day. I look at the previous day, and I actually write this stuff down. I don't do this in my head. It's on paper. I think on paper. And I look at what my activities are. Am I doing stuff like this today with you guys? Am I doing things that matter? Or am I simply out there trying to figure out how to trade my time for money? People will say, time is money. And I say, money is time. I'm going to do whatever I can to trade my money for time, because I want more time. Rich people figure out how to trade their money for time. Poor people trade their time for money. That is a huge shift. And if you take that and you really get that, you're going to start asking the question, okay, what can I do to get more time? That's freedom when you own your time, pure and simple. You guys asked me what my definition was. That's it. It is absolute control over my time. So figure out what you're going to give your time away for, because guys, we all have the same amount, 168 hours a week. And there's no different. There's nobody that has more than us. We all have the same. So what are we doing with it? What are we actually exchanging it for? Is it growth, or is it just more paper that somebody's printing out of thin air?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, and then I guess so for a final parting shot, just what would you tell yourself if you were starting over again? What's the bit of advice you'd give your younger self?
Fail faster, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. When I look back, and I've flopped, and I've had now more than 40 businesses, and at least 2/3 of them have been absolute like nothingness, where I just spent a lot of money for a lesson. The problem is it should have been more like 140 businesses, because you only have to be right one time in business. The problem is we tend to wait so long to get it perfect. It's like we're in our garage or our driveway waiting for all the lights to be green before we go out there, instead of realizing we might actually get hit in an intersection, or something might happen. A deer might run in front of us, I guess, if you're in the mountains. But we get so hell bent on being perfect instead of making progress. And I would have just said, guy, go fail faster. get a mentor that's going to push you to go do things more, even when you don't have a perfect understanding of what you're doing. Go take action, bleed, get some scar tissue. I was so worried about what people thought. And I think so many of us are. We're concerned what people are thinking when truly they're thinking about themselves, and they don't really care. They're not paying attention to us. Even though, yes, when you trip over yourself and you run into a pole, you look around and somebody's staring at you and laughing. But we get attached to that instead of saying, that's kind of funny. Maybe it'll be on YouTube. I mean, not worrying about it is the true freedom. And then you can start growing through those mistakes. So simply failing faster, as fast as possible, is the path to freedom.
Huh. I like that.
Yeah, great thing to go out on. Damion, where can people find you online and learn a little bit more about your books, your website, all that good stuff?
Yeah, visit me at damionlupo.com. I mean, that's the place that the runway, the freedom formula, where people can learn about that in the books. It's where I live. My digital me, you know, is at damionlupo.com.
Cool. And yeah, I guess with that, that's all we've got for you today, man. Thanks so much for making time for us. We really appreciate you. And sorry about the little snafu at the beginning, getting rigged up. So,
any parting shots?
You know, you guys, there's this misnomer I think that we've heard as kids, that, you know, that it goes back to the mistakes. I remember being a kid, and if you got 50% wrong, you were a failure, and they threw you out of school. And we get used to that, and so we try to find a way to not be wrong. And the truth is, if you get 50% wrong, which means you got 50% right in the real world, you're a billionaire, and you're a change agent, and you're an influencer, and you're free. So the question is, how many things can you get wrong and move forward from those things?
I like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Nice parting shot.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, our guest, Damion Lupo, catch him at damionlupo.com. You can also catch him out on the Transformation Nation podcast. Yeah, and I guess that's it.
Cool.
So cool. Well, thanks so much, Damion, for your time. Really appreciate you, man. And have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.